We're growing like crazy. We're producing cash flow. We're operating with a nice, healthy discipline. We're starting to get a little loose on some of my expenses because I'm like, hey, we got cash flow. All the stuff that had gotten me to the point where I had a 7-figure annual income. I had a 10-figure net worth that allowed me to step away and pursue what I'm doing now. All those things that allowed me to get there, I started to drift from. Why? Because I was actually pursuing what I thought was Christ-like things, but it was really for the glory of Brian. It was growth.
How can mastering relationships transform both your personal and professional life? Today on Seek Go Create the Leadership Journey, we're joined by Brian Slipka, founder of True North Equity Partners and an advocate for servant leadership. From starting at the ground level to establishing a conglomerate of over 20 independent companies, Brian's journey epitomizes the ethos of building wealth through diligent stewardship and ethical business practices. As the author of Winsome, 5 Proven Life Strategies to Win in Relationships, Brian shares the art of forming genuine connections that foster success across all facets of life. Brian, welcome to Seek Go Create.
Hey, great to be here, Tim.
Yeah, I've just finished reading your book, so we're going to have a fun conversation about that and being a business owner and all that you do. We've just met, so this is not really pretending. And someone asks you what you do. If someone asks you what you do, what's the answer you typically give?
It's a great question. I'm a purpose-driven business leader, right? And that may sound like a bunch of fluff, but as people get to know me and as I unpack what that means, they start to see how real it is and how it's transcended my career, my life professionally. And so, yeah, purpose-driven business leader.
All right. So purpose-driven business leader, there's 4 words there that I want to unpack just a little bit. Purpose-driven. And I remember years ago when the book came out and different things like that, I don't want to say it's a phrase that may be confusing to some people. I mean, the words purpose and the word driven should be self-explanatory, but tell me a little bit more about what that means to you, because it sort of has become some code for a few different things. So what does that mean to Brian?
Well, I mean, for me, it comes down to my faith, my strong faith in Christ and the promises of Christ. And as a believer, that's critical, right? But to specifically answer a question on purpose-driven business leader, you really got to go back to, and a lot of people have heard me tell this story, but back to 2013, my dad was dying of cancer. I had a successful career up to that point in enterprise technology, software sales, finance. I was a business owner, business investor, had a lot of different types of real estate, all that sort of thing. But I was traveling 200 days a year and my dad was dying of cancer. I went and visited him when he was in hospice. His eyes were getting all jaundiced and he was getting ready to leave this world. He was genuinely eager to move on to the next stage of his eternal being. The one thing he shared with me, and it was during a moment when I was frustrated and venting to him, here he is in hospice, venting to him about my plight at work. And I was complaining about something and having to travel so much and all that stuff. And he stopped me, just stared at me with these jaundiced eyes, and he said, Brian, what on earth are you chasing? I mean, seriously, what on earth are you chasing? I'm going to be leaving this world here soon. I'm not going to be here anymore. You got everything you've asked for and everything you've pursued. So, but what on earth are you chasing? And so when you ask the question and I answer purpose-driven, business leader, that is what I'm chasing. So what does that mean? Well, purpose-driven means to have impact and influence in the businesses I lead, to have an effect that echoes, to have an effect that transcends Brian Slipka as the individual, as the person. So much about what I talk about around surrendering selfish ambition, all that stuff has to do with this purpose-driven, transcending self, transcending your circumstances to leave an impact and influence on others.
So one of the things that always fascinates me, Brian, is how men a lot, seems like women maybe are a little bit more introspective this way, but men typically need some kind of event, catalytic event, or their father to hit them in the head with a 2x4, even though it's a phrase. So tell me more about that, because I really want to drive a little bit deeper into what that meant what that means for the way you're functioning and operating now.
Yeah, you're right. And by the way, you're right. I think with guys, they tend to, lightning bolts tend to resonate with them more than a dimmer switch, right? Although I will tell you, or more white microwaves, women are crock pots, right? So, I mean, there's all, again, more stories behind that too. But
Yeah, we want to unpack that because there's more to that from a physical standpoint.
yes. So for me, before I grew up in a Christian household, my parents, very faithful Christians, love the Lord, very Beaver Cleaver upbringing. For those of you who used to watch Beaver Cleaver, for me, it was reruns. We had a very normal family upbringing, right? Then you start going to pursue the ways of the world, right? I always was very ambitious and wanted to excel in everything I did. And for the most part did, certainly professionally. I did crazy things like I sold door to door to pay my way through college in the summertime. I always took that next ambitious step of pursuing the next thing, stretching myself. I got very comfortable being uncomfortable. I was pursuing more. And that became kind of almost like a healthy drug. It's good on one hand because you learn through adversity. It was self-imposed adversity, like it's self-imposed challenges, and that's how you learn and grow. But you do also got to realize at some point in your life to what end and for what purpose, right? So to answer your question, going through my 20s and 30s, I had earthly successes. I got married to my wife, Megan. We've been married 24 years almost. We've two great kids. And so as I went through my professional career, I was having success. I was doing well, making good money, hitting all my financial metrics and goals I was setting forth for me, like X amount of when I'm 30 and X amount balance sheet when I'm 35 and no debt when I'm 30 and all this stuff that was part of my economic scorecard financially, checking the boxes, great wife, great kids, dutiful responsibility, to taking my family to church every Sunday, all that sort of thing. Where I'm going with this is there's a lot of listeners here that are probably going through the same thing. They're doing all the right things and they want to be, and in many cases, they are living a godly life. But what I challenge everybody today, and what really hit me through my dad's conversation with me, but then it was a dimmer switch building, but that lightning bolt of my dad's confrontation to me really put me on the other side of the bell curve, right? Of where I now realize, now how shall I live? Chuck Colson's book, right? Now how shall I live? And so that was really the event, but really what it created is this intentionality around my daily pursuits, my thoughts, my actions. And prior to that, it was about how I could advance in an earthly format. And it truly was selfish ambition. I can rationalize all I want that it wasn't, Tim, but it was selfish ambition. It might have been selfish things for my family or for my wife or for my extended family or my friends or life experiences, all good things for my church, for the ministries I supported or I was involved in. But that was still selfish ambition. And so this event really, the after is more that surrendering selfish ambition and being very watchful of my sin nature around selfish ambition and really harnessing it into ambition, which has a much greater multiplication effect, and that will echo into eternity and echo into generations beyond me.
Right. So anyone probably that bumped into you you and I had this conversation pre 2013, I would have said, this is a joke. I hope you'll get it. Looks good, smells good, successful. Everything is in order. This guy's got his act together. Correct. I mean, no one would go, oh my gosh, he's one step from something, right? You were successful, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and I would even go so far as people would say, oh, he's a generous guy, loves the Lord. His actions do speak loudly. I mean, I was doing a lot of the right things, but my heart, there's still a portion of the God-shaped hole in my heart, right? I mean, like there was part of that I hadn't surrendered. I hadn't surrendered the selfish ambition. In fact, there's still days where I'm not surrendering the selfish ambition, right? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I don't want to have the listener think that I've arrived, right? I haven't arrived. There's still a sanctification process going on. It's not all a bed of roses. Every day I got to recommit. Every day there's a sanctification process. And every day I do see me advancing, right? closer to the Lord, closer to living a life in full surrender. But every day I'm working on it too.
One thing, yeah, we all are. I think people that have been listening in here for the last 3, 4 years definitely would agree that this is a journey. There's a reason we now have a subtitle, The Leadership Journey, not the destination, not an event, not the 7 easy steps to being the greatest leader ever or anything like that. No, it's the journey that we're all on. Brian, it's interesting when I hear, I kind of want to dig in a little bit more to that question your father asked you of what are you chasing? Because there's a theme that keeps coming up. I think it was part of what I've been through. It's part of what we've had so many people on the show that have said something to the effect of they were addicted to more, or they were addicted to not drugs or any of that kind of stuff. But you said your father asked you what you were chasing. And all of those things in the world system are typically rewarded pretty well. I think the struggle that a lot of us go through is that how do we function and do work within that world system, but yet our passport's got kingdom of God on it. And
Yep.
there's a strain there. So what was when your dad said, what are you chasing? Give me a little bit of the thought process you went through. Did you just wake up the next morning and change, or did you have to go through some form of you mentioned sanctification. Let's be a little less churchy. Let's just say,
Yeah,
what was the
no.
transition that you went through to start that realization? Because I'm sure it wasn't as instantaneous, but it got your attention. Let's take a short break. I've got a question for you. Are you feeling overwhelmed by challenges in your leadership role? This is Tim Winders from Seek, Go, Create, and I understand how tough it can be. As an executive coach, I've guided numerous leaders through their toughest moments. Whether it's navigating team dynamics, strategic decision-making, or personal growth, I'm here to help you overcome these hurdles. My clients have broken through barriers they once thought impossible, and you can too. Don't let challenges hold you back. Visit timwinders.com/coaching and book a free discovery coaching call with me directly on my calendar. That's timwinders.com/coaching. Together, we'll forge a path to greater success and satisfaction. Now, back to Seek, Go, Create.
Yeah, it was a 2x4, but just like getting hit with a 2x4, you pick yourself back up, finish your day, and keep going, right? In the wake of it, my dad asked me the question, and I'm a cartoon bubble guy. So my dad asked me that question, hits me like a 2x4. And what I'm envisioning is this guy trying to run after something. It's like the dog track. You're never going to catch it. And what he was basically saying is you're chasing something you're never going to find. And he's basically telling me, you're a good man, you love the Lord, go pursue that, and pursue something bigger than yourself. And just from an earthly sense, bigger than yourself, right? And so in the wake of that conversation, he passes away. The whole funeral, the week of the funeral, and I gave the eulogy along with the mayor of the town. And that was a very cathartic process. And it just started building up inside me, this pebble in my shoe, so to speak, kept kind of coming back up. And then I went back to work and kept working hard, got promoted at work in the weeks and months and years after that. But what also started happening simultaneously is this notion, hey, my work is a form of stored labor here on earth. And I want to deploy that stored labor to be able to have that impact and influence. So it's the Shawshank Redemption movie moment, right? Yep. It is Andy Dufresne talks to Red in the courtyard of the prison saying, Red, at some point you have to ask yourself, it's time to get busy living or get busy dying. Now in that movie, for those of you who know Shawshank, Andy didn't just break out that night. Andy then began or continued a journey to eventually lead to his breakout, right? If you watch the movie. So I think for me, what really started in an earthly sense was I just started pursuing activities and objectives tactically so that I could leave the day job, just being blunt, leave the day job and pursue what I felt God was calling me to do, which was being a business leader, business owner, and sticking my neck out there to lead people so that they can grow closer to Him, that I can be a cultural witness to how I lead my companies, and I can profess my faith in being a private business owner, without threats of retaliation or being told to do it a certain way. All of those things I knew I was working towards after that moment in time. It was a process, not an event, but it began the process. And I was very intentional about the process after that event and of my dad passing. So that's really how it happened. And it wasn't until 2000, really 18, 19 that I really left the day job. So that's how it was a 5-year journey, about 4.5-year journey of me getting ready to get busy living as God has called me to do. So
Yeah.
that's,
I like the
that's,
Shawshank. I like the prison analogy there because when I was in corporate, money's good, love the people. I do think people are called to different things. I want to say here, there are some people that they're supposed to be in those mission fields. There are people that, and they
absolutely.
know it, but I knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. And so, all right, and I was going to ask you how long that took before you got to a place where you began that process. But I think I need to ask this question, Brian, because there's probably people listening in that are probably like you, bringing in a strong 6 figures, maybe more. They're in a role that they believe they need to get out of, but sometimes there's almost, I don't want to say financial handcuffs. That sounds a little harsh, but there's these burdens that are keeping them there. And so I guess I'd like to ask you, do you have any other words of wisdom for someone who might be battling with, maybe they've had that conversation with their dad or they've been hit with a 2x4 and they know, but maybe they're still in process. They haven't gotten to your 2018 place where you know you're there. They're still going through it and they might be struggling with it. What can you tell them? What can you encourage them?
Yeah. Well, first off, they need to have an honest assessment of self of are they pursuing an idealistic lifestyle, an idealistic sort of day in the life, which frankly is selfish ambition, or are they pursuing the strengths and basically the strengths that spiritual gifts, right? And I think there's a distinctive difference. The word that comes to mind also is courage, like a courage quotient. I'll give you an example of some colleagues that have contemplated going off and doing businesses on their own. And when push came to shove, they couldn't forego that $250,000 income. Even though they had plenty of money, they may have a 10-figure net worth or more. But even just having the courage to surrender that guarantee, that safety net, that life raft that is a financial element, they just weren't able to cross that chasm. Others, it's maybe a little bit different. Maybe it's a little bit further down the courage quotient where they're willing to surrender that, but they also don't want to go backwards with their net worth. Maybe a 10-figure net worth, and they have an opportunity to start their own business, and they're willing to give up their income and the corporate stuff, but they are unwilling to go backwards. Like, oh, I can't go backwards, even if it means, would of course being part of a business owner, you got to be willing to like lose it. Not only surrender income, but actually go backwards on your balance sheet. I mean, that's a whole nother level. And I think having an honest conversation with yourself on where do you fit in that realm, because God has equipped me with this. It's not reckless, but it is an unconditional faith. My mom and my dad told me from an early age that, like, man, you just have this unconditional faith that like it's all going to be good because you're willing to roll the dice a lot, Brian. I'm like, yeah, no, what's the worst that can happen? And maybe I lose everything and I have to start all over. I mean, God's equipped me with the ability to do that. So for me, it was a lot easier to surrender, basically to have that leap of faith. But, I also gave up a 7-figure income. I mean, it was, and it would have been year after year after year, and it would have continued for years to come. I mean, it was not going to cease. I mean, it was going to keep happening. I gave it all up to step away to what God called me to do. And that's really to be this business owner and to stand tall in my faith as a business leader and as a business owner and be that cultural witness for how to lead companies, how to lead people. And so to me, I'm doing what God called me to do. And by the way, it hasn't all been a bed of roses either. It's been really challenging, specifically like the last couple of years. And so this level of sanctification, I know that's churchy, but like, I'm just saying, like, this level of personal development, this journey, as you talk about, is ongoing, but I know I'm doing what God's called me to do. And that was so neat about this.
Yeah, that's part of the refining process. All right, so I want to drill down on that. You know what God's telling you to do, because I think the challenge that many have, Brian, is that they're either copying what someone else is doing, and we know that that can be a recipe for challenges, especially when things get tough. As long as it's easy, it's fine. Or they're not. This is what I'm going to say, but I'm going to let you tell me what your practice is to reaffirm this. I do think that there's the faith practices of being around a community, church family, having mentors, things like that. But for me, the last 12 plus years, my still and quiet time has become the most valuable. And I even observe it in leaders that I work with, the leaders that have a healthy practice, and it's different for everybody. I'm not sitting here saying it's 15 minutes here and you got to get up at 4 a.m., blah, blah, blah. But what are some of the things that you do? Yeah, I was sort of joking about hustle culture there. Sorry. What do you do to make sure that what God is calling you to do is what God is calling Brian to do? Not Tim, not, Richard Branson or Elon Musk or someone else, but how do you make sure it's what he's calling you to do?
Such a great question and such a wise thing to be contemplating. By the way, you're saying this because you've learned the hard way. I heard you asking the question, I couldn't help but think about how my short answer is I've learned by trying to be a false, chasing it's back to the chasing. What are you chasing, right? And here's the thing. I'm chasing right now, I'm pursuing my relationship with Christ. And when I do that, it brings clarity to my earthly toil, my daily toil. Like, where do I need to be spending time on the businesses? As weird as it might sound, you pursue Christ, in your pursuit of Christ, you gain clarity on what your temporal toil should be and your temporal pursuits. And so that's what's worked for me. And when I drift from that, I shouldn't be surprised when I take a step back and be like, whoa, that was for the glory of Brian. That wasn't for the glory of God. And that's a pretty powerful thing to internalize. People need to really think about that, because that's where I stumble. I pursued a business a few years ago. So I leave the day job and growing. I'm buying all these companies, acquiring all these companies. We're growing like crazy. We're producing cash flow. We're operating with a nice, healthy discipline. We're, starting to get a little loose on some of my expenses, because I'm like, hey, we got cash flow. All the stuff that had gotten me to the point where I had a 7-figure annual income. I had a 10-figure net worth that allowed me to step away and pursue all, what I'm doing now. All those things that allowed me to get there, I started to drift from. Why? Because I was actually pursuing what I thought was Christ-like things, but it was really for the glory of Brian. It was growth. It was profitable growth. It was the number of companies. It was all these metrics that I started getting obsessed with. I started getting obsessed with, all for, the right pursuit, instead of, and this actually speaks to what you mentioned, and this is the sanctification thing in me. I yearn for quiet time with the Lord. I just thirst for it because I seek Him. And when I do that, then I'm like, oh my goodness, Brian, like, the metrics don't care. That it's the impact and influence I'm having at being a witness to my love of you, Christ. And so how could I let myself get that? So even today, like, it's the drift, the book Mission Drift, right? Great book. But think about, for every one of us, every day there's mission drift. C.S. Lewis, you read about it in the Screw Tape Letters, right? There is a constant drift because there's constant pressure from the opposing forces that are causing that mission drift every day. So, and it's for seemingly good, Christ-like advancements and things. And that's the deceptions. Having that quiet time brings clarity to what the truth is.
One of the things that I've observed is that the Lord gifted me with a few superpowers. But Brian, I've noticed that my superpowers can easily become kryptonite. And the reason I preface that question is I'm going to ask you, what are some of the giftings you have that are superpowers? And have you observed similar things that I just brought up that we start leaning on those in a natural way. When I bring that up, what comes to mind? Just share whatever you want to related to that.
Well, what specifically comes to mind is last night I had an elder board meeting. So I have an elder board. These are folks that are literally elders. I mean, they're wise beyond their years, and they're older. They're all older than me, but at different stages of life. They've just become mentors to me. And these elders I'll meet with, they help hold me accountable to Christ-like pursuits. And they are all Christ followers, and they really help me stay close to what I call my plumb line of living close to the Lord. To answer your question, most folks' superpowers or greatest strengths are also your greatest weaknesses. For me, yesterday, one of my elders reminded me, he's like, Brendan, remember, you are a V12 engine. Most of your employees are 4-cylinder or maybe V6s. Every once in a while, you may have a V. You're a V12, and that's how you get into trouble. And that's also going to get you out of trouble. Well, so that's very real to me. When I look at all the areas I've stumbled, it's because I've been borderline reckless. I've been moving too fast. It has anointed me with, I think, some superpowers where I don't need a lot of sleep. I mean, I'm needing more as I get older, right? But, I multitask exceptionally well. I mean, that's how I can have 25 businesses. They all are ran by operating leaders and stuff, but that the fact that I can manage it is because of what God's given me as a superpower. But it also is what's gotten me into extreme trouble at times too. And that actually leads to another contemplation. We talk about these superpowers, greatest strengths, greatest weaknesses is, the kind of fight or flight leader you are, like life inventory, right? When you're operating under peak conditions, how do you behave? Okay. When those peak conditions may vary from person to person. For some, it might be financial safety. Others, it might be physical safety or like they're in good shape or jobs or security of some sort, right? The peak conditions. And then how do you operate when your back's up against the wall and are really bad conditions? Is it a fight or flight? And what I've learned about myself is that I actually am more of a fight guy. Like, I mean, I will stand up. I don't run away. Like, I'll just fight the fight. And even if I lose, I'll fight because for me, it's probably a little bit of human pride, right? Which is a sin nature element. But I also think that God's equipped me with a gifting around fighting. It's a little bit like we talked about this last night with the elders too. In World War II, Winston Churchill is known as one of the greatest leaders of our, previous 3-4 generations, right? Preceding him was Chamberlain as the prime minister of Britain. And he was well thought of. I mean, he was an incredible operator. He was an incredible, dutiful politician. He ran the country really well. But when push came to shove and his back was in a corner, it was he had a flight mentality. He just didn't want to engage. He wanted to appeasement. He wanted to cut deals. All of a sudden he started like all the stuff that he was good at, he wilted away. And a guy like Winston Churchill, who was a swashbuckling, kind of like, really, that guy was the wartime leader that God called upon to lead Britain and the Allied forces to success. And so I think about that analogy that all of us ought to be thinking of, like, what is our characteristics trait? And by the way, Chamberlain, it doesn't make Chamberlain bad and Churchill like great. It's just knowing how God has gifted you and how God has made you. And then again, now how shall we live?
Yeah, and one big thing with that, I mean, I love the study of Churchill and Chamberlain too, by the way. I'm kind of a junkie for history, stuff like that. I believe that if Winston Churchill hadn't existed, the world will look different today. We'd be in a different place. But the thing that bothers me at times is kind of going back to, I asked you about superpowers and, kryptonite, is at times I do think we need a Churchill and at times maybe we need a Chamberlain. And I also believe that the Lord equips you and I with some of those skills. And the thing that I need wisdom for at times is when should I fight and when maybe should I back away? I mean, have there ever been situations where you took that fight and you said, you know what, maybe I didn't need to fight in that situation. Maybe, and if you're a fighter, you want to fight. I remember meeting Evander Holyfield one time. And I shook his hand. He was about my height, a little shorter. I mean, 6 foot. And the guy had cinder blocks for fists. And I'm sitting here thinking, this guy looks like he could do other things. No, he was built to fight because his fists were the size of cinder blocks. So, ever been a time where you fought where you went, you know what? Maybe it didn't require a fight. Maybe I needed to be more like a Chamberlain during that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, a couple business examples. I mean, one business example in particular, a few years ago, I bought a company, seemed pretty low risk. We raced through due diligence because, again, I was pursuing this growth, this notion of growth. We buy the company. My operating leader at the time, I allowed him to, I consented to a lot of the decisions he was making, but there's a few really bad decisions that we made that really caused the company to get really upside down on inventory. We made a couple of bad decisions on some supplier relationships. And all of a sudden we found ourselves, and then in our inventory management system and our customer system we bet on. Anyway, it was a calamity of errors, right? And at the end of the day, I ended up losing about a few $1,000,000 out of it. I mean, that's how bad. I mean, it was a bad deal for me personally. But what I learned through it was, it was July 4th. I was in my porch getting ready to celebrate the 4th of July with a bunch of friends and family. And I'm on this conference call with my chief operating officer. And he basically told me, Brian, it ain't going to get better. It's going to get a lot worse. It's probably good to hit the escape hatch and just cut your losses. And I'm like, what? And he kept, and he knows me well enough to know, like, I know it's not what you want to do, but think about it. And it ultimately ended up being, the analogy I use is kind of like the two best days of owning a boat: the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Even though, whether you use it a lot or not, right? And I think that business, the day we sold that business back to the person we'd bought it from, because I went back to that person, said, hat in hand, hey, we've failed miserably. What I've paid you is yours. What I owe you, I'll make whole, right? And I'll settle all the affairs, but will you take it back and be a steward of your employees and a steward of everything else, and then we'll just be done. And most business owners probably wouldn't have done that, but thanks to good guidance, good people around me, that was a lesson I learned about, oh my goodness, like, I surrender, Lord. I mean, and again, that goes back to the earthly pursuit, chasing financial success, points on the board, all this stuff that, society as business leaders tell you got to be pursuing. Some of your best wins are actually your greatest losses. Think about that. Like, some of your best wins long term are your greatest losses short term. And that spoke to me, and I continue to feel that with some other decisions since then that remind me, even though I may be spiritually gifted in certain ways, to lean on the Lord, pray for clarity, and clarity typically will emerge.
Generally, leaders need a healthy, strong ego. Do things like you just bring up, did they impact your ego some? Was ego something that might have been pushing it forward more than it should have? I guess this is probably me just asking, what's your ego like, Brian?
Oh, I definitely have one. I mean, and I think well, I know it's changed a lot over the years. We have another business that's really soft right now. And because of the aforementioned story I just told about the business where I took those losses, and frankly was embarrassed, and just had to turn the page. It kind of empowered me to be more vulnerable, right? There's this addictive leadership. It's called addictive leadership, and basically it's following a 3-step process. Being vulnerable, surrendering the outcome, but then be willing to do the work, right? And I've really embraced that to help humble me. I mean, am I being vulnerable? I mean, am I just asking myself in my heart of hearts, am I being vulnerable? Lord, am I being humble to all those around me, and vulnerable? And like, for example, we have another area of our business that's really soft right now. And I've been just so extremely vulnerable with all of the stakeholders, because I just want them to know, like, okay, here's what's happened. A lot of it's industry related, but a lot of it's, we made this decision, we made that decision. And I said, I'm going to stand behind my commitments, even if, and I'm going to surrender the outcome. If it means that it means that my wife and I are writing checks to cure all of our commitments, so be it. Right. but I'm going to surrender the outcome. But no, I'm not going to go down without doing the work. I'm going to do the work, right? As God's called me to do. He's given me the capacity to fight, but I'm also going to surrender the outcome. If it doesn't work, I'm going to hold my head high, because I'm answering to God. He knows that my heart is following through on the commitments, and yet also surrendering the earthly outcome. And so it's a powerful, it's addictive leadership. Be vulnerable, surrender the outcome, and be willing to do the hard work. I mean, and that's been transcendent for me to help get to what you're talking about, like where I'm truly it's not, getting rid of that ego.
And that word vulnerable is such a tough one. I had a conversation with someone not too long ago on the podcast. There are people that are using that term vulnerability, authenticity, not as a core characteristic of who they are, but it's a tactic. They're using it. And when I'm hearing you talking, I'm knowing that it's a characteristic. It's who you are. There's another word that I've seen in the research I did on you, and the word is stewardship. And what's interesting to me is that many people would think there's quite a dichotomy between someone who has, I'll call it ownership. We'll use the world system word, ownership of 20 to 25 companies, but yet they talk about servant leadership and or the word stewardship quite a bit. Those are two different things, but they're sort of related. Talk a little bit about, I don't know, the difference, the relationship, whatever you want to say about ownership, stewardship, and if you want to throw servant leadership in the mix too, because I know it's part of a good bit of what you talk about. Talk about those, and I'm sure I've got some follow-up related to that. So,
Well, I mean, this really speaks. This might be a little bit of a segue unintentionally to the book I wrote. I mean, it really speaks to, man. There's so much to talk about here. The brutal reality is that stewardship, as defined like by the dictionary, more or less. I'm going to use my own words, but it's stewarding resources towards something that isn't about. The way I've interpreted it, it's not about you. It's stewardship towards whatever you have. So you've been entrusted something, like it's stewardship around the resources of an association you're involved in, right? It's stewardship over something your grandpa gave you, that you inherited, that you want to keep in really good condition, right? Just common elements, right? So when I think of the word stewardship, we're coming alongside a lot of these business owners that are transitioning their life's work. We're buying their business, right? Or we're helping them with some of my businesses, my brokerage and investment bank. We're helping them sell their life's work, right? And that is such a profound responsibility. So the word stewardship really centers around that. Like, we're trying to steward what they've worked their whole life to build, and to transition to the next buyer or whomever, right? And so we take at True North, we take that super seriously, because, like, man, we're focused on them. And so where the books even came about is people started asking me, like, tell me more about the stewardship. Tell me more about, like, what makes you different with how you're able to do this. And I basically started explaining what became the 5-tool framework. I'm like, well, you just have to grab your bat. I mean, it became the 5-tool framework, that a baseball analogy, but basically it means you got to get in the game. You got to understand what they need of you. Like, it's not about you. Like, stop thinking about yourself. Like, it's not about you. Like, how can you help them? And then when you find out that information, you can assess the situation, which in the book is all about being on the on deck circle and then being at bat. You can focus on driving in runs. Like, and when you drive in runs, you're helping that seller in this case, right? And then you're helping yourself, because the team's going to win, right? And then you win and all that stuff. So that leading the businesses we acquire have to be a really good fit, where, like, we're coming alongside them. It's not like us taking what they have, right? I mean, so it's like we're shoulder to shoulder, instead of them versus us versus each other, right? And then the fifth tool, the 5-tool framework, is like getting back in the batting cage and reflecting. So this notion of self-reflection. being vulnerable, like, and really, really having this sober reflection of self of, man, I am really bad at that, or I really screwed up in that moment. Please forgive me, and this notion of apologizing and asking for not just apologizing, but asking for forgiveness. Um, and so when I look at being relational, being a steward, it's all of those things. It really is. And that's my crazy definition. Some listeners may be like, well, Brian, that's a lot of other things. Maybe so, but like I think it's stewardship, it encompasses all that stuff. And and that leads to trust, speak to trust. It leads to a lot of other elements. And I'll be honest, I mean, like, our businesses could be making a lot more money than we actually do. Why? Because we're stewards. Because we're stewards of what commitments we've made in the earthly realm, but also commitments we've made in an eternal realm to help come alongside people and grow in their faith and do all that sort of thing. Um, so that's what stewardship means to me.
Well, I wasn't going to ask this, but I'll drill down a little bit. Is money a great measurement of how well something is doing? I'll ask you this way: is it the best measurement? Because you're obviously a money guy, you're a financial guy, you've got skills in that area, but yet you now talk about being purpose driven and stewardship. And I'm not saying that we ignore it, but what should we be measuring now?
Yeah, I mean, so like our businesses have been tested by this question over the last couple of years. We're coming off a really really strong years in 2021 and 2022, and then we started meeting some softness in our businesses in 23, and then it's continued and persisted in 2024. I think most small business owners would probably agree with that. I mean, it's been a lot harder the last couple of years than it was in the wake of, and even during COVID. Business was booming. I mean, it was for a lot of reasons, right? And so we were measuring success, even in the last 4 or 5 years, off of like what we were giving away philanthropically and from a ministry standpoint perspective, endowing small ministry pursuits, fully funding chaplaincies, and doing all these great noble things, right? And then here the last couple of years, we've had to batten down the hatches of our giving. And so from a measurement standpoint, it's been a lot less. Profit's been a lot less. Giving's been a lot less financially, right? And yet, Tim, our impact and influence for a variety of reasons, and I got all sorts of evidence around this, has been far greater. I mean, far greater. And it's been less about the financial, and it's been more like we're changing folks' way of thinking about business. We're inspiring folks to get out of their comfort zone and have the courage to maybe take the leap of faith for what they know God has gifted them from a skill set and capacity standpoint. Like we're empowering them, we're activating, we're igniting, which is part of what we want Sure to be all about, to have that impact and influence. So it's crazy how even though some of the financial elements have deteriorated, the impact and influence has been exponential. And to me, that's what we're talking about here. I mean, that's our measure of success. And so we've had to reflect on that. And we've also reflected from a wisdom's perspective of, building your storehouses for seasons. And that's another lesson. Like there's going to be seasons where we see the fruit a lot more abundantly in front of us. There's seasons where we don't see any. And the fruit can be defined as the impact and influence, can be defined as the financial. I mean, there's a lot of different types of fruit. And so how are we managing that appropriately to honor God and to be that steward again?
Yeah, what's interesting is that in general, in our lifetimes, I'm 60, I think generation or so ahead of you, we've had, I don't want to say it's been soft. We've had some ups and downs, but we have stuff going on. And so a lot of our measurements are, bank accounts up and down and things like that. I just think at times, I'm a history guy. I know it sounds like you do some study in history. Had we been, first of all, we wouldn't be having this conversation if we were in, the 1600s or the 800s or even the first century. We'd be having different conversations. And I think what we're doing is we're trying to have more eternal conversations with still all of this financial ROI here. And so I love the term impact. That's a powerful one. I do want to get to, I just finished reading the book Winsome, and great book here. Got my copy for those that might be watching on the video. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. I want to ask a few questions about it, but there's one more question I want to ask, maybe kind of big picture, because I love, Brian, talking to people. I go into leadership teams of companies, and I work on organizational health, leadership development, things like that. So I love asking people that get to see a lot of organizations like you do. What are you seeing? What are you seeing that's working really well? What excites you about leadership in general right now? What concerns you? I also know you're a pretty avid, like I once was. I'm not as much anymore. Current events, what's happening in the world. I think you consume quite a bit. But what can you say about what you're seeing with the 2025 companies? You're obviously dealing with leaders and leadership teams in those. Just give me some thoughts on all of that.
Well, so I'm going to give a plug from one of my friends, David Warsager. He runs the Trust Edge Institute. David's a great leader, world renowned, from talking about the topic of trust. And so, what comes to mind immediately is he has these 8 pillars, right? And what's been in my heart lately, and they're all C's. It's clarity, compassion, character, competency, commitment, connection, contribution, consistency. I think I got those right. But the two that really are on my heart, clarity to me is the most important. It always has been, right? I mean, just clarity of purpose, no matter who you're dealing with, no matter whether it be talking about your faith. There's not many people that in the business world that don't know I'm a Christian. In fact, I would say almost everybody does, because I'm very clear in my faith. But I also don't have thou shalt either. I mean, there's a lot of folks of other faiths in my businesses, right? I mean, and they're very comfortable with that because they know my character, right? Which is one of the other attributes. Which and that's one of the 2 that are on my heart. I mean, it's really compassion and character that I think separates a lot of business leaders today. And compassion is people putting people put faith in those who care beyond themselves. And I think that's and showing genuine concern for others. I mean, that's what builds trust. And then character, because people notice, those that are doing the right, instead of the popular or easy. And I just, to me, those are the 2 that stand out, and those are the 2 that I lean into every day. Like, how am I showing compassion and character in all that I do, even if I just am like, I don't want to do this. And that's, because I think that's where leadership sustains itself and shines brightest is when you have those attributes.
So the neat thing about this, I see how a lot of things are tying together, Brian, and I really enjoy it. You brought up at the beginning, purpose driven, and when we've talked about stewardship and things like that, there's something that you brought up earlier that struck in me, and I think it actually ties to your main character Sam in the book here, and that is, many of us, I will put myself in this category, especially in this business world, leadership world that we play in, it is very easy for us to begin thinking that everything revolves around us, or that we're really good, or that we're a talented athlete, leader, whatever, Brian. And I've guilty. I'm calling myself guilty of this. But to me, that compassion, I'm going to go back to that. It's reminding myself that the world doesn't revolve around me, that
Oh
I
my
need to
goodness.
surrender. And it seems as if I actually read your book yesterday. I mean, I read the whole thing yesterday. So I was able to read the whole thing. I want to say too, I found myself tearing up a couple of times, which kind of bothers me. I'm not necessarily a real emotional person. And oddly enough, being a leadership guy and all, I've written more of a fable novel too. It's odd that, because probably you would have written like a leadership book, 7 steps, kind of like your buddy David that you just mentioned. So, how did the book come about? Why did you write it? I mean, why did you write a fable? Why didn't you just, come up with the 5, the 5 techniques, the 5
Well,
strategies? I mean, come on. it's a really, I thought it was a really good story too.
it's not gonna be that impressive of a response, but I mean, honestly, I mean, the books that have resonated with me over the last 10 years, I read a lot of nonfiction stuff growing up in my college in my 20s and in my early 30s. And then really the last 10, 15 years, I just really gravitated towards Patrick Lencioni and John Gordon. And I've got a chance to meet both of them. I've really gotten to know John Gordon, consider him a friend now, or a dear friend. And I think so frankly, just I could those are stories that I think resonate. It's usually they're a couple hour read. Mm. You can knock through them pretty quick, and there's usually simple but profound elements to all of them, right? And I just like that, right? I mean, that's how I'm a big picture guy. That's why it was a fable. Now, how it came to be was really, as I mentioned earlier, just as I was buying these businesses and people were asking me, my response started to be like, you just got to be winsome in what you're trying to achieve. It's not about you, it's about them. And so you got to be winsome in what you're trying to achieve so that you really are creating these win-win environments. And then that became like, oh, I should write a book called Winsome. And then what would the fable look? And that kind of just came to be, right? And guys, for all the listeners, you got to read the book. And when you do, I want you to all know, I am a mild version. Maybe my wife would say not so mild sometimes, but of the protagonist Sam. And I wrote the book. It ultimately became this cathartic sort of process of realizing just how cringeworthy some of my antics have been over my life, right? I mean, and maybe not as bad as Sam in the book, or embarrassing as Sam, but nonetheless, they existed. And so for me, it was a very cathartic process of being vulnerable, right? And part of the sadness elements of the book, mm, I just had to make it a little dramatic on what he was going through, so that the reader would really understand. Like, I mean, this is like, how are you handling it? And I think everybody would agree when you read it, you kind of start to self reflect on yourself, and that's the point of the book, right? Is you can't help but reflect, like, man, I'm like his son on this situation, or I'm like his dad, the grandpa, right? His dad. Or I'm actually like the clubby. I'm the one that's coming alongside all these people right now. And so I think that's what makes the book so powerful. It's just the relatability to it, even if you aren't a baseball fan. But it was deeply personal. It's a deeply personal exercise that I think really told a story. And I think Sam's actually got more of a story to tell. I mean, that's part of it too. If you read the book recently, like you said yesterday, you probably could tell a little bit that Sam's story may not be done, and that there's more to it, and that's part of the journey too of sanctification.
Yeah.
There's some elements of faith in it, but it was about relationships, and yet when those when you figure out how to, using the 5 tool framework, have deeper relationships, it actually opens you up for a much deeper meaning sort of conversation around eternity and around, very, a lot more. And that's where we're headed with Sam and his journey.
I kind of did. I finished it and I went, huh, I think there's more there, you know? But anyway, excellent, excellent book. We'll mention in just a little while where people can find it and things like that. But there's one more. I don't want to ask, somebody who's got their hands in so many business things. Well, one thing related to that, what'd you think about the writing process? Did you sit down and peck this out? Did you have any help? Did you do it on your own? What was the writing process like for you?
No, I definitely had some help, but the process was again deeply personal, where it's like I was having to reflect on every element of, like, the emotion, and that's what probably was the part for me that was such a cool process, is just the emotional elements and really wanting to wear the plight of every person in it. And how they fit. And it was fun. I mean, I enjoy it. It took me like 2.5 years. I mean, it took forever. I mean, we started up, pick it back up, kind of redline it, 10 times and delete parts of it, and some parts of the story I just completely got rid of. And, um, but overall, I think it, hit the mark, and the response has been great. And, I'm really excited for, Sam's journey, because I think this is one of those things like John Gordon told me when he launched Energy Bus, his first few years, he didn't sell many copies. And now it's like, a perpetual bestseller, like 15 plus years later. And I think there's a little bit of shelf life that Winsome's going to have too, because it's timeless truths on how to have an interpersonal relationship, focus, how you handle it, and how to build a framework around your thoughts, because it really is about thought control and being intentional. And so those are timeless elements. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Absolutely. Real quick, I saw where one of your business interests is minor league team, the Canaries, Sioux Falls Canaries. Just real quick on that, and then we're going to wrap up here. But tell me, some people say, "Oh, that sounds cool." Is it as cool as it sounds?
No, I mean, it's been a journey. I mean, we bought a situation where we had to kind of turn around the culture, and add to just make a lot of investments, and we're going to be entering our 5th season, and we've turned the team around. I mean, attendance is up, fan engagement's up, fan involvement's up. We've given a ton of money into the community, poured money into the community, given back. We've won. We've made the playoffs the last 2 years. So it's been a really incredible success story. I think, I was telling the president of the Canaries that we brought in, I'm like, we could write a white paper, or at least do like a case study on how to change a culture, and how to have a growth mindset, because that's what our team over there now has, the front office, everybody. And so it's been fun. This is actually my Canaries sport coat that this is the Canaries colors, and just really, really grateful for the opportunity. And bought that with a college friend of mine, that again, what are we chasing in life? And we wanted to have a shared experience together and have a reason to find time to spend time together. And so that was a Winsome example of us thinking about each other and like, hey, how can we spend more time together? Well, let's buy a baseball team. Kind of a weird example, but it was actually, that was the reason why we bought a team. Wasn't for the investment, wasn't for to make a lot of money or any of that stuff. It was to have fun and have a shared experience together with my friend who I care about. And so that's another great example, but it's been a lot of fun.
At least their colors aren't bright yellow like that Savannah Bananas guy. You'd have to be wearing that yellow colors all the time, right?
Yeah, you won't see me doing that, but this is pretty flashy for me. So this is about as flash as I get.
Very nice. Hey, Brian, tell everybody how they can connect with you and find the book Winsome. Again, here's a picture of it for those that might be watching the video. Tell them where they can find you and connect with you if they want to get more info on you.
Yeah, well, you can go to truenorthfamily.com. That's our corporate family website. You can go to winsomefable.com as well to order it, especially group orders. There's a lot of groups that are starting to order it now, because it is one of those books that's a great read to talk about as a small group, or even just a larger group. We had a class in college actually use it as one of their courses, just from a relationship standpoint, and as it relates to business. And so, but yeah, and of course, Amazon and all the different Barnes and Noble, all those folks, you can order online and through them as well.
Yeah, and I like the hardback. I got a hardback copy of it. I don't know if y'all sent it over or if we bought it, whatever. But anyway, I like a little hardback book. It feels good in the hands. I like that in reading. Hey, Brian, we are Seek, Go, Create. Those 3 words. You can probably guess where some of those words come from. And I'm gonna allow you to pick one of those over the other 2 that means more than the other 2 currently. Don't overthink it, but seek, go, or create, and why. Last question.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be go, because so much of our world tells you to not, or to pause, or to go the other way. And so just the notion of going, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You got to go, learn from your mistakes, have a bias for action, be willing to fail. All of those elements. That's how you learn and grow. And you're gonna realize and go through adversity, pain, and toil, right? By just going, right? But sometimes that's exactly what God wants you. and so just encourage everybody to go.
Love it. Thank you, Brian, author of Winsome, 5 Proven Life Strategies to Win in Relationships. Go check it out. Get the book, get copies. Like, you need to get multiple copies from what Brian said. And I appreciate this conversation. I love conversations with people that have gone through events where they've had to make adjustments and transitions and changes. That's one of the things we're doing here at Seek, Go, Create is we're redefining what success looks like for people, talking about that leadership journey. We have new episodes every Monday. We're on YouTube. Make sure you're commenting. Leave comments down below if you've watched this on YouTube. We're on all the podcast platforms, releasing every Monday morning. Until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.